So here we are again. Very good morning to those of you joining on this Zoom, and for those of you joining later on YouTube, then good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And so a very warm welcome to this, I've already lost track, I think it may be our third session on the Kinjuk. So let's start, as we always try to, with the finest, purest, happiest, most loving, caring mind that we can muster up in a few seconds, but we try and do our best to be our best. And the idea of this initial motivation, it is like the launch of something, like when you launch an arrow or launch maybe not a paper aeroplane, because paper aeroplanes go all over the place, but maybe an arrow, is that the impetus carries it in a direction. So we've got an hour and a half, more or less, together. So what we're trying to do is to set the tone, to set an underlying profound wish, to be present, to listen well, because we love and care for everybody, and Dharma is nourishing the best in us and making us a better person for everybody. So it's that kind of motivation. Not just prayers you have to do at the beginning, but this is kind of setting our mind on how the next couple of hours is going to be. So let's do that. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on, until we reach the very heart of enlightenment, through our practice of generosity and all six transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening, every enlightened quality, to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every one of those beings be well, live long, be healthy, be well provided for, have good friends, find respect, live in places of peace and plenty. Most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for these good circumstances to be their wealth in future lives. May they be free from suffering and from creating causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being totally beyond suffering, and attain the great equanimity that's free of closeness or distance from anyone. Deyata shame shamavati shameta shatru Om kurimam kurimarajite karota keyorite jovati olayane Peshudani male malapan naye kukure kakagrase grasana Om mukhi paramukhi amukhi shammadavane savagraha bandhanane Nigri hitva savabhava pravadina Vimukta marabhasha savitva buddha mudra Annugatita savamare putsarita parishuddhe Bigashantu savamara kama ne. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our heads, on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we are one. So we are having in this course just a moment. A more classical approach compared with the other Zooms. Some of you have been around with me for a couple of years now in these Zooms, and sometimes it's more or less formal. This one, we are following a text, more or less idea by idea, so it's quite a formal presentation. So we usually start each session by zooming in. It's boring, but we do it every session. And that way, whether you like it or not, by the time we come to the end of our Kenjuk studies, you'll have a very clear structure without any effort, because you've heard me do it too many times. So the Buddha's teaching is the three baskets of Vinaya and Sutra and Abhidharma, and also Tantra, so mainly those four. Here we are focused on the Abhidharma basket, taught by the Buddha, but really, how can you say, brought to life in detail some 500-600 years after the Buddha, once there was writing and once there were academic institutions in India. And we are studying a synopsis of the Buddha's Abhidharma teachings through the work of Mipam Rinpoche, a very, very great scholar of the 20th century, late 19th, 20th century. And so Mipam's work is in three main parts: 10 domains of learning, through which we gain the 4 vidyas, or the 4 intelligences, which enable us to explain Dharma to people that's authentic Dharma, because it has the 4 seals of Dharma. 10 domains of knowledge, 4 vidyas, 4 seals of Dharma. In the 10 domains of knowledge, then we're in domain number 1, which is about the 5 aggregates. And in the 5 aggregates, we are still, although we've almost finished, in the aggregate of form, the first of the aggregates. So here we're dealing with the forms that manifest to us, let's say. Better to say to us. Once we start saying to the mind or to this or that, it gets complicated and too difficult to be careful with language. So to us or to you, what manifests. So these are like children's toys. You know, when you've got children have toys, you can make up stories with them, toy soldiers, toy anything. You can move them around and create a story. But the basic kit are the toys themselves. So we have built up a set of realities, we could call them references, since we came into this world. Some of them even remain from past life, but most of them have been built up since we were conceived, and very much so since we were born and we got exposed. After that beautiful time in the womb, then off, there you are, and there's a world, and there's people, and there's parents, and there is learning in all sorts of ways, like it or not, through experience. So we're looking at our basic set of references, and in the 5 aggregates we're learning to be much more precise with our analysis. We are learning to be much more scientific when we talk about ourselves, even to ourselves as we're sitting, meditating, trying to understand ourselves and what goes on and why it is like it is, then our analysis will be clearer, it will be more accurate, and the language for describing what goes on will be good. Buddhism is very good at this. It really is. I have wonderful friends in other faiths, and they are truly spiritual people. But they often comment, they say, Buddhism is so good with language at expressing what happens when one contemplates, when one evolves spiritually. We have a very, very thorough language. Of course, thanks to Buddha, because he taught for a long, long time, compared with many other teachers. So we're in this first aggregate of form. And then, so to carry on zooming in, then there are 11 aspects of form. There are the 5 sense faculties, and there are the 5 objects of those sense faculties. So we've done those in the previous talks: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. If you get into this, you'll learn to rattle those off just like that. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, like that. And then seeables, hearables, smellables, tastables, feelables in your body. We looked at those, we looked at some of the details, and then we went on to number 11, which is unrecognizable form. We saw the Mahayana and the Shravaka versions of that. In the Mahayana, it's referred to as the doorway of mental objects, just like I explained this idea of doorway, ayatana. Like for seeing, it's the ability of something to be visible. There are so many things around us which are not visible. But some, for humans, are visible. So then there is what we call a doorway into that reality, into that experience of seeing that thing. I think I mentioned it last time, but it really strikes me. These amazing images from NASA of deep space, all these colorful things where they look like whatever it is, eyes, dragons, galaxies, But if you could go there, you wouldn't see that. You just see grey. Because what they are putting into visible form for us is what their telescopes pick up from infrared, ultraviolet radiations of all sorts that the eye can't see. So there is no gateway, there's no ayatana of visibility into those things for us humans. So here we're looking in number 11 at this gateway, the ability to be experienced by our mind. Gateway of mind, what your mind can experience, but that other people cannot recognize. People can recognize your 5 sense faculties. People can recognize what you're looking at. They can, and if you're both in the same room, they're hearing more or less what you're hearing. But when you're sitting there, thinking, remembering, even thinking thoughts about them, they can't really tell what's going on in your mind. So the doorway of mental objects. We looked at those, we saw what they were, and we finished a little bit quickly with this unrecognizable forms. And we're going to a second level of unrecognizability. People can't see them because they're in your mind, of course, but then people can't know because of not just what's in your mind at the moment. What's important in this section is what you are committed to. what you are committed to, whether you're thinking about it or not. Because that defines you. Much more than a momentary reaction defines you. Momentary reactions come and go, but people are dedicated to something, and that colors the rest of their life. I often use the example that strikes me very much of migrant workers. Migrant workers, like here in France, they send money back to Africa, usually. If they're in this part of France, they're usually from North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa. And they're keeping a family alive, sometimes lots of people. So they work to a minimum. They live to a minimum here. They cheap accommodation, cheap food. They work as much as they can. Nobody can see that unless you know. But the point is, that commitment that I must look after my family back home, I must look after my village, they depend on me. That commitment is very powerful in shaping their karma. And it's not there all the time. It's not that every second they are thinking, must look after my family, must look after my family, but it's there behind the scenes. And there's a whole area of psychology where behind the scenes of somebody, there's a story, there's a commitment. Some people lose a partner earlier in life, their partner dies. And they, because of that, they've felt so faithful to their partner that they think, I don't want to have any relationship with another person in this life because I want to be faithful. This is not Buddhist, this is just, I hope it's a story that makes some sense, you can imagine it. So it's something that colors all of one's life. It's behind so much of what people do and don't do. When this is formalized, then in Dharma, we formalize it through vows. A vow has to have certain aspects. It needs to be properly taken from a proper teacher, through a proper ceremony, and with the right motivation, and so on. But when we take that vow, from that time on until one of three things, from that time on until you die, from that time on until the vow expires, maybe you took a vow for a week or a year, or until you break it, if unfortunately you can't keep the vow, then it says when you're asleep, when you're awake, even if you faint and you're totally unconscious, the power, the karmic power, this is what really we're looking at, karma. The karmic power of that vow is at work. So if it's a virtuous vow, you're generating virtue all day long. A lot of people don't get this, why Buddhist teachers are keen on precepts. It's because they want benefit for us, and they know that this is that's the case. In a less totally formal and rigid way, a similar commitment on a negative side, they usually take the example of a vendetta, when there's a vow for revenge, then that's generating harmful karma all the time, because you are basically committed to it. So anyway, this is what we're looking at is what is called unrecognizable form. So it's not just unrecognizable because it's in your mind in this moment, but it is a long-term thing, and nobody can know unless you tell them that you have a vow, that you have a commitment. So we do lots of vows. We do pratimoksha vows, bodhisattva vow, 2 aspects of bodhisattva vow, tantric samaya and commitments. and they are what? They are classed as forms. So that's why number 11 is not straightforward, that an object is a form is very straightforward. So I think what we need to do with form, because we must finish it and move on, is first of all to finish it, but then before we move on, for me to recommend to you how you can work with it. So if we go to our text, then we've got a section called the limits of form. It's a conclusion. So when a few weeks ago we did time, the chapter on time, as a special one-off, then we looked at the various ways in the past people measured time. So now with form, we look at how people measure form so they can communicate with each other. And for us, this is not too interesting. It's useful if you are working with old texts, then you see the ancient measurements. So it says the 10 forms above, 5 sense faculties and their objects, are aggregations of minute particles, and hence they evolve from a compilation of the finest indivisible particles of matter, which they call monads. 7 of the very finest particles make a small particle. And multiplying by 7 like this to give us some idea of scale, we get small particle, iron particle, water particle, rabbit or hare particle, sheep particle, oxen particle. And so it says these are just terms to give us a scale of measuring from the size of a speck of dust to that of a flea's egg. A flea's egg, which was actually used as a painting measure. Those of you who know Tibetan art will know that the measurements for making tonkas are in, I hope I'm right, and I seem to remember they're in terms of so many flea's eggs. Buddha's face is so many flea's eggs wide as compared to so many flea's eggs high. So this is what we're looking at. These days, of course, if Buddha came back today, then we've got things when we look at the scale of the universe, then we get down to all the fractions of a centimeter, a millimeter, and all the way down to 10 to the power, about 36, and all those zeros, fraction of a millimeter, when we start getting to the cosmic foam, and as small as we can measure so far. Maybe they'll break through the smallest measurement and then find a whole universe, and then have to go down into that one. It says, when we visualize the Buddha, in each pore of the Buddha's body, then there's a whole galaxy and universe. So, but anyway, there are those classical, to describe what can't be seen, basically. And then there's a finger width, and then 24 finger widths make 1 cubit. So that's approximately 50 centimeters cubics. It's somebody's arm. Of course, we've got longer arms and shorter arms, but it's sort of No, we're roughly an arm's length, or 4 arms length more accurately. 4 cubits make 1 bowspan, that's about 2 meters. 500 bowspans make 1 earshot, which is about 1 kilometer. Now, an earshot means actually within earshot means you can hear it, outside of earshot means you can't. And this applies to natural sounds because, of course, here we've got earshot as 1 kilometer, roughly. But if an aeroplane much more than 1 kilometer away goes through the sound barrier, you'll hear it. But we're talking about natural sounds. This becomes useful terminology when talking about retreat, because it says ideally if you go to retreat, you should be beyond earshot of worldly life. So if there's a village, if there's a town, ordinary, then if you can hear their conversations and that kind of thing, is not very helpful for your retreat. So if we're with just with the birds and the chattering animals, that's fine. But hearing worldly life going on can be a very, very big distraction. Can cause big emotions. So 1 earshot, and then 8 earshots, so that's 8 kilometers roughly, make this old measurement called a pakse, about 8 kilometers, which was used for measuring areas. And you'll find that in old texts, these old words, kalpas, pakse, and then if you like visualizing your refuge tree, if you're doing prostrations, it says it's so many pakse high. So we're visualizing a tree that's many, many, many kilometers high. Very big. We're very small. You're there doing prostrations, and your family and all other sentient beings around you. And there's this. The idea being it's so big it can contain so many wonders. You can't sort of run out of space in the refuge tree for having wonderful things. And everyone who's in there is surrounded by lots and lots of people. If you've got one of the Karmapas in the refuge tree, that Karmapa had a whole life. That whole life influenced many lamas and so on and so on. So there's plenty of space for all of that. Anyway, pakse. So then it talks about our level. We'll come back to that in this time or next week, which is called, now in here, is called the level, I've translated it as the level of passioned existence, which it is, and is sometimes called the desire realm. So when I did that translation, it was a compromise between a poor translation, to my mind, of desire realm and a more accurate translation of sensorial realm. So if you know any Tibetan, there's the word döpa. Döpa normally means desire, but döpa is short for döpiyönten. Döpiyönten are the objects of the senses that we've been looking at here. So we're in a realm where we are very sensorial. Suffering is sensorial. Heat, cold, hunger, pain, all these things. It's the 5 senses and their objects. Our life is basically a sensorial life. There are 2 other realms that we'll come to. One's called the form realm, which is a bit confusing seeing as we're studying form here. But what is called the form realm is just a name, and that is the realm of samadhi, when your mind is not in your senses, but your mind is collected deep within itself in absorption. to put it in a nutshell, gone. Gone. You're not seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. You're not fantasizing, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. Smelling, tasting, touching world, or shut up, gone. One-pointed absorption. Form realm. Most of the one-pointed absorptions are the form realm, except for the third dimension, which is formless realm, which is much more abstract. It's infinite space, meditation of infinite space, infinite consciousness, and so on. So we are in this sensorial realm, but because we are sensorial, then that's why we have desire, we have aversion, and so on. We look at things, we look at somebody, we're jealous, because they're bigger, younger, smarter. If you didn't see them and hear them, you wouldn't be jealous. and if that cake didn't look like it just came out the oven, and if it didn't smell so good, then you wouldn't desire it. So we're in a sensorial realm. And the value of shamatha and one-pointed absorption is that we learn what it's like to be out of that sensorial realm. So it says, on this level of desire realm, passionate existence, sensorial realm, senses, phenomena which have no sentience and which are silent have 8 monads. The 4 principal elements, earth, water, fire, and wind. So if you're correcting as you go along, anytime it says air, it's wind, not air. Air's not good for the elements. And then it has form and smell, taste, and texture. When things in this world emit sounds as well, then they have 9 basic components. Monads means basic, really basic components. And then if there's sentience, then there are 10 monads. If there's another sense faculty as well that coexists with the basic mind sentience, then that makes 11 monads. Now, we could go into this, but we're not going to, because it's not something we do very much in Tibetan Buddhism. In Theravada Buddhism, this very precise analysis and all the computations that go with it are an important part of developing the wisdom that underpins meditation. And so you get lots and lots of very complicated mathematics about, okay, you can have, now we've seen you can have an exceptional 11 of those, but then in this circumstance where there are 6 other possibilities, then you've got 6 times 11, and that gives you 66 possibilities, and so on. This is how we end up with 84,000 dharmas. Dharma means things. 84,000 different possibilities of these basic components that we're studying in Abhidharma. It doesn't mean 84,000 teachings of the Buddha, like sutras or discourses. It means 84,000 different possibilities. Like we've just seen, we just had 11, right? So we're not going there. I mean, either you go there and you do it properly, or you know you're not going to use it. So I just flag up what this is about. And if you're really interested, we can talk about it, but maybe not. So there we've finished the section on form. Or have we? No? We've only just started. We've only just started. Because what's the use? What's the use for you, for me? Haven't you studied enough? Haven't you got too much information? Is information doing you that much good? No, we want useful information and we want to use it, because useful information that's not used is not useful information, is it? Let's do that one again. Useful information, the Buddha gives us useful information. But if we don't use it, it's just information. It's just words, ideas. You listened as I talked, you put it together, it made some sense to your intellect. Key question, this is what this is all about. Did it change you? I don't think so. Just a bit more information. But why is the Buddha giving useful information? What is the use? Is to change us for the better, to help us drop the ugly stuff, the harmful stuff, and to shine more and more, be more and more free, clear, wise, kind, all those things. So then how can we use in general, the 5 aggregate information is through what is called the second stage of wisdom, which is contemplation. We have to bring it to life. No one can do that for you. We have to do it for ourselves. Teachers can help us sort of set the process going, but for you to change, you have to think, deep think about this stuff and realize what you're being told. It needs to somehow go in. The little lights start flashing and, oh yeah. So we need to do that with what we just learned about these 11 aspects of form. So we need to realize, first of all, so I try and help you to see how you might think about it. Aggregates, meaning heaps and heaps and heaps, lots and lots and lots. You are a unique heap of forms, and I'm a unique heap of forms. So to understand it, let's try and understand it, for instance, through a process of removal. Imagine that you were born blind. You didn't have a faculty of seeing. You didn't see anything, because not being able to see, then number 2 of our forms, visible things, wouldn't exist for you. Think of all the things you've seen. All the things you've seen. Many hundreds every day. And so then we do that with each sense. Imagine you've been born deaf. You never heard sound. You never heard music. You never heard speech. You're in a world without. Just think then how all the things you've heard. Isn't it amazing? And then the same tastes and smells, all the things you've smelled, which are your references. And then all the experiences your nerves, your body has had, from the most painful to the most blissful, and heat and cold and hunger and thirst and physical longing, physical satiation, and so on, these things we looked at. So we strip away, so imagine you didn't have that sense, but then imagine you didn't have 2 of those senses since birth. Take away that. Imagine you didn't have 3 or 4 or 5. So just listening to me saying that's already helpful, but what you need to do is sit down, spend quality time, and just think about your visual journey through life, your hearing journey, your smelling, tasting journey. And then the next step, to realize how it's unique. Nobody saw life through your eyes. Even if you're in the same room, even if you're in the same place, nobody heard things the way that you heard them. Nobody felt things, tasted things. They couldn't. Nobody. Just can't. I've known people have arguments with. I say it's blue. They say no, it's not. It's green. So, I mean, what can you say? I mean, for me it's blue. For you it's green, and it tastes horrible. It's like, oh, it tastes quite nice, and your journey is very unique. And then when we look at, because we're talking about the senses more accurately, when we consider, for instance, hearing, then we hear animate and inanimate sounds, and some of them are speech. So speech with meaning. It's like you listen to a foreigner you can't understand. It's just sound, it's music. So amazing to travel around Europe and listen to the music of German, of like Finnish, Norwegian, and so on. I did up and down and all the different, and the music of Spanish. They speak so. It's like this, just the music. But then when you understand what they're saying, that's different. It's so different. We think about that. We think about what people have told us, nice things, horrible things, elevating things, deprecating things. We understood it. Nobody heard it like you heard it. It's all part of your references. And then, so we put those together. So that's, when we contemplate, we think, what is this talking about? We're in number 1 of the 5 aggregates. By the end of the 5 aggregates, we're going to see how these things interact, trigger each other, and make us make karma, make us act in the way that we do, towards ourselves, towards each other, in a helpful way or in a harmful way. So first we need to get on top of form, which are the basic components. I think our set of references as a term is very useful. My set of references based on my whole life's, what I've seen, heard. And so if you've had something similar, we can communicate. But the more dissimilarity there is, then the harder it is for us to communicate with each other, for instance. So please spend good time exploring this. Now, when we look at these forms, this isn't, by the way, this is not Mipam's teaching. This is Ken's prolonged reflection. You are so lucky. You're getting the benefits of my 40, 50 years of contemplation. How fortunate you are. Or how boring it is, maybe. But anyway, this is what I'm trying to help you with. So in this set of references that we have, there are 2 areas of form. One is in the living moment. It's happening right now, right now. And we explore this through mindfulness. So with mindfulness, it's very much about awareness of the moment. And so you will actually taste your food much more as you eat it. Object, faculty of taste, and then there comes the P. And taste of P, the doorway, the entrance into the P taste world has been opened, and you have a moment of P, and then a moment of carrot. And as you see, rather than just looking, you see mindfully. You're aware of your faculty of seeing, the seeability of something, and then coming together. So these references are building up all the time. Mindfulness in the present moment helps us understand that since the time we were born up until now, we've had present moment after present moment, adding more and more references to our set. And then you're going to die and lose them all. Start all over again. So curious. So we explore the present moments one after another. So many trillions and zillions of them have created this set of reference. That's one area. The other area is memory. Because of the imprint left by the present moment in the past, we have a memory. And that's also a set of references for us. It's our main set of references, but it's only possible because of present moment. When we come to the next aggregate, which is feeling, so feeling good, feeling bad, we can see that you can, for instance, directly experience something in the present moment, and it feels good. But you can remember it too. Remember something like it, or even better. So you might taste, where were we? A few moments ago with cakes. What sort of a cake can we have? A baba or a rum baba. That used to be one of my favorite cakes. So I can eat a rum baba and have a nice feeling, aggregate number 2. But then I can remember the best rum baba I ever ate in my whole life, that was made with very special Jamaican farmer's rum, and was cooked by that baker who died a long time ago, but he made bubbas like nobody else. And I can feel like, feel even more pleasure. So our references are in reality, and they're in our memory. And memory is so very, very powerful. So when we explore forms, mainly when we look through the list very quickly, 5 senses, there are 5 objects, and then prostrations, vows, okay, got it. But when we look at the power of forms, and especially in making us who we are and making us make karma, then this exploration needs to look into what I just mentioned. Memory, and more generally mind. And through that exploration of form, you might appreciate more how your mind is so unique. Nobody in this entire world has a mind anything like yours. Nobody. I remember Akon Rinpoche said so many times, he used to put it in his own English, he used to say, there is no compare. We can never compare human beings or sentient beings. We are each unique because this set of references made by our direct experience that makes these forms that people your mind, all the images, all the sounds, everything you ever experienced in this life, that your library is totally unique. So please explore that uniqueness. Even when you're in the same room with the same people talking about the same things, your version of it is so different from everybody else's. So now let's move on to the next aggregate, which is the aggregate of feeling. Feeling as a study topic is the easiest. So relax. How many are there? 3. Only 3. What are they? Pleasant, unpleasant, nothing happening. Wow. Well, that's it. We've done feeling. That's all there is. It's as simple as that. It's not, what are your feelings about the current situation in Lebanon? Not those kind of feelings. No. Feelings in Abhidharma is very simple, too simple. Nice, not nice, nothing. That's all. Or, if we want to make it more complicated, why not? Then we can make it 5, whereby we make nice, or pleasant is the actual word, pleasant or unpleasant. We can make mentally pleasant or physically pleasant. And unpleasant, mentally unpleasant, physically unpleasant. Can do it that way too, which gives us 5 feelings. Something could be physically unpleasant, but your mind is at peace, so your mind is not suffering or hurting. And the same, something could be physically pleasant, like you're getting a massage, but your mind could be in equanimity. You're not going, some people, I think they sort of groan when they're being massaged. That's nice. Or, yeah, you could be in a state of mental equanimity while you're getting a massage, and so on. You could make 5. So it's as simple as that in Abhidharma study. As far as the description, we've done it. 3 or 5. Now, putting it into context with the first aggregate, which is what our teachers do when they explain it, it's said that with each consciousness, so when our faculty of seeing meets with a seeable, so that's 2 areas of form, seeing, seeable. When they meet through consciousness, there is immediately, automatically, a feeling. They say in the first split second, when we looked at the time chapter, it's in the first kichik, the first instant, there is sense contact. In the second instant, before you can think, before you can identify, before you can recognize, before anything else happens, along with that seeing, there will be pleasant, unpleasant, excuse me, or it says neutral, but it means nothing's happening, fortunately. Because if you just look around the room you're in, you will be seeing hundreds of things in these few seconds. If you had a feeling for each thing you saw, my goodness, you'd be a wreck after 2 seconds. So most things, nothing happening. Now, okay, that's the way mind's sequencing works. Now, this becomes important later when we get to the 12 links of interdependence, because we see the faculty of seeing, sees as seeable, and then if there's a pleasant feeling, then this can trigger desire. Because of the desire, we might deepen the desire and eventually act in order to get what is pleasant. So in the creation of karma, the feeling that seeing triggers beyond our control. This is before you can think and control and say, no, don't want that, don't want to react like that, don't want that to be painful, don't want this to be pleasant. Before you can do anything, there is an automatic feeling. So if you explore this, when we contemplate on feelings, because we did the learning already, we did it. There are 3. That's it. You learnt it. So now when we explore it, when we contemplate our feelings, that's where it gets complicated. Because the feeling is not automatically within the trigger itself. Cakes are not necessarily desirable, seeing as we've been with cakes in this example. I can take them as an example because they probably are desirable for lots of people, so it makes sense. Anyway, it's not in the thing itself, so that everyone who sees that thing, hears that thing, smells that thing, tastes that thing, touches that thing, would automatically have the same response, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. That's not the case. So when we explore, and when we explore the uniqueness of our own mind stream, our own life, our own experience, then how is it that seeing that is unpleasant for me? Whereas seeing it for somebody else might be pleasant. Or hearing. Like music, yesterday in France we had Fête de la Musique. They encourage everyone to go out on the street and make music. You know, and what's great music for some, it's horrible. You know, for others, you know, you can't bear it. I don't think I could take a techno concert, but I think some people would really love to go to one. So how is it that this particular moment of sight, when we get precise, this instant, this living instant of seeing that thing, seeing that shape, that color, or hearing that sound, well, of course, it's because of past associations. This story, until now, of living moments of our 5 senses and their 5 objects, and number 11 as well. Because of those, then we've developed a reaction. Now, this is good news, because it has been developed. It can be undeveloped, it can be worked with, it can be gotten rid of, it can be changed. That's good news, because if it was in the object itself, nothing to do. Nothing to do. And when we go to the extreme of this ability to change, then everything can become bliss. If everything's bliss, there's no more suffering, is there? But why do we suffer? What is suffering? Mainly, it's when it hurts sensorially. But that sensorial hurt can also be triggered by our mindscape, which is basically memory. We are moving around in our mind's set of references, and we think of a situation and it hurts. This is very real. Some situations you can't even bear to think of them. You can't pronounce a name. You can't even go to that time in your life, because somewhere in that time it was too painful. Or maybe even it was too blissful. And it's just too sad that you don't have that anymore. So you don't want to go back there. You don't want to stir up, inside you, contrast. This is very real. This is the reason we do what we do. We do to each other what we do. This is why Abhidharma is so useful. It gives us the analysis that enables us to change things. So the feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, or nothing happening is because of past associations. So let's just leave that there. So now we move on. Let's do what it says in a second. So we're on page 11 of the support document. So 3 or 5 sorts of feelings. Now, then we get into the sort of Abhidharma we're not doing, okay, but that is very present in Theravada Abhidharma. Working from the support which engenders the feeling, there are 6 modes of contact: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, mind. So they can be seeing pleasant, seeing unpleasant, seeing neutral, hearing pleasant, hearing unpleasant, hearing neutral, smelling pleasant, smelling, and so on. That gives us 6 times 3, 18 possibilities. And then, so it goes on. Furthermore, one could distinguish physical feelings, the 5 senses, as opposed to mental feelings, the gateway of mental consciousness. Corrupt feelings, meaning where we get caught up, get involved in things, where there is craving. Uninvolved feeling, where there is no craving. And when we look at the 12 steps, 12 links of interdependence, you can feel your conditioned attraction to something, but no longer feel craving, whereas before you did feel craving. I remember, for instance, when I gave up smoking. I gave up smoking 52 years ago. 52 years ago, I took refuge. And I wasn't a resident at Samiling then. I was living in a tent. And so Akron Rinpoche said, if you take refuge, I want you to do a 5-day retreat afterwards. And there were little tiny huts at Samiling down by the river at the time. They've all been replaced long since. So there was a tiny garden shed, really. And so I did a 5-day retreat in there. And when I went to get the instructions before going in, Akron Rinpoche said, oh, and you'll give up smoking. Well, I've been smoking for, 11 years by then. And not a heavy smoker, but a smoker, you enjoy it. So, so I did. I gave up smoking. So then after that, for a while, when you smell it, you get the, oh, that's nice. And some craving, but the craving for Dharma was then bigger, so forget it. Whereas before I tried to give up smoking several times and it never worked. There with Rinpoche's blessing it worked. But then there would be pleasant, especially for Dutch tobacco, Dutch tobacco smells so nice. And so there would be pleasant sensation. So faculty of smell, object of smell, tobacco smoke, pleasant sensation, but then no craving. It's just an example to make a point. Something can be pleasant without you craving it anymore. So that's that through examples. And then those same feelings, to finish off just what the text says, those feelings can be the basis for attachment. But if you practice Dharma, your feeling of, oh, that's nice, he's nice, she's nice, it's nice, whatever, that's nice, can also be a basis for renunciation, where because of where you're going with your Dharma path, that's nice, but he's nice, but she's nice, but, and so then mustn't get too much off topic because we're just studying Abhidharma, but just to try and help you see the value of things. Sometimes in Vajrayana, we realize that there can only be powerful progress towards Buddhahood, towards freedom, towards a mind that's so clear and pure, if there is powerful, what can we call it, challenge, maybe, challenge. So it's okay to go away into retreat and separate your five sense faculties from the desirable objects. But of course, if you can be with the desirable objects and still not be craving, then you have more advanced, you're further along the path. And if you can be with very, very, very powerfully desirable objects and still be maintaining your vision and your path, then that is fantastic. So it's saying there that feelings, we could also classify them not just in a raw sort of basic state, nice and pleasant, but we could say when we look at feelings as a basis for someone's attachment and desire, or feelings as a stimulus, as a basis for somebody's Dharma path. When we study the four Dharmas of Gampopa, then we see in the third and the fourth Dharmas how what were kleshas, mind poisons, how they become converted instantly into realization. So here we're just looking at the feelings component of that. And I'm just talking about these other things, Vajrayana practice, four Dharmas of Gampopa, to help bring to life these categories of feelings. So then next, today we just touch the beginning of the next aggregate number 3, which is now in your text, you've got perception. It's okay, we can call it perception. It's the way we perceive things, but actually a better term would be cognition. So if you can replace in your text perception by cognition, then it's much better. Why? Because then it's so easy to understand. You put RE in front of it, recognition. When you recognize something. That's what we're talking about in this third aggregate. You recognize things. If you remember, in the first aggregate, we said that the eye faculty can see color and shape, but it doesn't see things. Because the recognition comes afterwards. What the eye actually takes in is shape and form, and then it's our mind, if we say in general, that recognizes that form. So from a baby, we don't recognize many forms. We learn to recognize people, things, sounds, feelings, all these aggregates. These are forms. We learn to recognize them. The process of recognition that we're talking about here is a process it's called isolation. So over the coming week, your homework, if you've got time, is to explore this topic of isolation and recognition. It means that of all the colors and shapes coming to our eyes, or all of the sounds coming to our ears and so on, we isolate out one as a something. So like on a sheet of paper with words on it, your study support document. It's not just like squiggles on paper. You recognize letters. You recognize them. And so then we separate one letter from the next. It's like in handwriting where it's all joined up. Then we separate separate. And you read it so quickly, separate. But maybe if two letters were smudged, if it was written in ink, and it's separate, then you have to look 2 or 3 times or work out what's that saying. But you read it quickly, and it all made sense. Maybe somebody wrote it separate with a wrong letter, then you stop and you think, oh, that's misspelled. But you looked at it so quickly. People who speed read, they pick up a page of text and they're like, and that's it, they've done a page. Just amazing. I remember I've got a Tibetan friend, he's a khenpo, who speed reads. He can speed read English because his English is good. And somebody gave him a text to read. And he turned the page. They said, "You've not read that?" And he said, "Yes, I did. I can speed read." Which means in that time he'd read every letter, or more or less. So we go into Samiling Temple, and instantly that's a drum, that's a painting. On the painting, that's a face, these are arms, that face has got wrathful eyes, kind eyes, whatever is in it. We recognize it straight away. Now this is the mind-blowing bit. You walk into a room, like the room you're in now. Look around, how many things are there? How many shapes, colors? You walk into your room, I think I said this last time, or the time before. One thing's changed. You didn't change it. Me did. Who's been here? You walk into the room, in 1 second you have registered so much, you have recognized, recognized the whole room. You compared your mental picture to the present picture and seen that picture's a bit wonky. It wasn't like that when I left. What happened? Nice, maybe, or something. If you explore this, and then how The mind separates one thing from another. This room's changed. What's different? You must have had this experience, you guys. Something's different. And it takes you a while to work out what it is. But immediately you've recognized, and then you will think about it's that. So let's look at the main categories. We can do that today, then stop. Page 11. So we've seen now, we've got power to see, seeables, power to hear, hearables, power to smell, smellables, power to taste, tastables, power of the body to feel sensations, sensationables, whatever, nerves, nerve endings, and mind and the object of mind. Just like the eye has its object, our mind can think about things. It can explore memories. Our mind is like a faculty, and it has its field, which is almost infinite, where it can wander, where it can explore. So we've got these 6 areas: seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, mind. So there is 6 areas of cognition, recognition, cognition of visibles, hearables, smellables, tastables, feelables, and recognition of mentalables or mindables. These are our 6 areas where we recognize. So we'll stop there today. So we've had some long sessions the past 2, so that gives us either a bit more time to discuss and explore, or we get off early for lunch. So let's first dedicate. May whatever virtue was created by this session contribute to the state of omniscience being attained. By the main enemy, our mind's defilements, being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every sentient being become freed from the ocean of existence, troubled by its waves of rebirth, aging, sickness, and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it's not yet arisen. May its development know no setbacks, and may it increase ever more and more. Through this virtue, may we quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. So, over to you. I don't know if you've got anything you'd like to add, or comments or questions.
Hi, Ken. Just a quick comment. I'm not a computer expert, but I think there is a way of changing your unchangeable PDF into a changeable document. So it might be useful if that could be done and you sent it out again.
Yeah, good idea.
Because I because of my history, I like to edit everything.
No.
And I agree with you about cognition rather than perception. I think it's much more correct, if I can use that term. You mentioned about speed reading and seeing something. One of my few talents is as a proofreader, and throughout my life, it's always interested that I can be given a text which maybe 10 people have looked at and corrected, and I can go through it and find many different many mistakes, either abbreviations or spellings. And it's amazing how many people read a text and don't actually see them.
Yeah, well, as a writer, I've been on the other end of this, giving text to people to proofread, and then you think you're cool, and then somebody like you comes along and you realize that you're not.
Yeah, I was once phoned by a friend in an advertising agency, and he said, oh, I have a brochure, full color brochure here, quite short. And he said, I've read it 4 times, and I'm pretty sure it's okay. But it's going to cost us 20,000 if it's actually wrong. We have to reprint it. So could you have a quick look at it? And I looked at it, and within, I don't know, 10 minutes, I sent him back an email with 6 corrections,
Yeah.
and he just hadn't seen them.
No. Thanks for the link, James. So just before we started recording this session, then Janie was asking about what makes a good translator. And, well, I think most of us are thinking about Tibetan translations. But I'd like to answer from, I think, what is fairly universal in the translation world. Short of some amazing exceptions, a person should always, first of all, translate into their own language. They should be an educated native speaker. There are some exceptions, but it really shows when somebody isn't. The main point for me, especially with Tibetan translations, is that a translation should, let's zoom out, what should it do? It should create in the reader's mind, or if it's an interpretation, the listener's mind, what is in the writer's mind, or what is in the speaker's mind. It's nothing to do with words. In the original language, when we communicate like this, we communicate, we use words to get something across. And from that point of view, there's a certain flexibility, more in English language than, for instance, in French. French is very disciplined for the precise meaning of words. And if you're not precise, a French person often can't understand you properly, whereas an English person can. So it's a question of not, there's this word and that word and that word in the Tibetan sentence, and what does this word mean and that word mean and that word mean, which is where not so good translators, to my mind, feel safe. A literal translation. And you see so many literal translations and so many Dharma teachings, Dharma translators, interpreters, who speak this kind of, well, it's incomprehensible. I mean, we get used to it, but you bring somebody who's not been to Dharma teachings into a Dharma talk, and you've got these people who are on a path with 2 accumulations, and they're doing this and that, and you're doing, what's all that about? There's a jargon. But beside the jargon, there are lots of terms which are literal translations that don't really get the message across. So in most languages, when you translate from one language to another, the person needs to be a native speaker, they need to understand the original, and they need to write in their language what best reproduces what's in the original language. I'll give you a simple example. Katia, she translated more than 80 books from English into French. One of them was written by an Irish author. The title was Poor Bastard, right? Now, it didn't literally mean bastard, somebody who was illegitimate by birth. It's an expression. Ah, poor bastard, like that. So how would you say that in French? You wouldn't say pauvre bâtard. So you find what in French gives that same impact. Now, if somebody told you about somebody, oh, poor bastard. In English, what would you say in French that conveys exactly that degree of many things, actually, many emotions, how you feel that person? So it should be like that. And then it should read as ideally as though it was written in English. You don't know it's a translation. And so many translations you read, they're disjointed because Tibetan sentence structure is very different from English sentence structure. And many people sort of reproduce it. They say, like, to the Buddhas, I go for refuge. And we've all seen things like that. But go for refuge is what they say you're not going anywhere. It's the way the Tibetan language expresses taking refuge. In English we say, I take refuge. We take refuge in something. We don't go for refuge. Now you've heard it so many times in Buddhist texts, you're used to it. You're conditioned, you're indoctrinated. But if you're just an English person, you take refuge. In Tibetan, the way that's written is with the verb to go. And then what you're taking refuge in needs to come first because the verb's always at the end of the sentence in Tibetan. So in the Buddha, I take refuge. But in English, you don't say that. You say subject, verb, object. I take refuge in the Buddha. That's a proper translation. To the Buddha, to the Dharma, to the Sangha, I go for refuge. So a translation should read like it was written in the original language. Tibetan reads like it was written in Tibetan when it was translated from Sanskrit. But, gosh, the number of arguments there have been over this. For instance, my translation of Gampopa's Dapotajin, the jewel ornament of precious liberation, there are two versions published by Wisdom Publications that are quite different. First one I did with Geshe Thupten Jinpa, Dalai Lama's translator. We had a big row about this order of the sentence, and it should sound like it was written in English. Big row. So the first version that came out as part of a collection of 3 texts, I said, I can't put my name to that. I said, I'm going to have to put translated by Ken Holmes, edited by Thupten Jinpa, which is what we did. And then after a while, when everything had cooled down, a year or 2 had passed, then Wisdom Publication said, we'd like to publish your version as a standalone text. And I said, I can use mine, without Jinpa's editing and putting things in the order. And so then we had a lot of discussion about details, but yes. So then the second one came out, the one some of you have got. This one. But the first one is in a really thick volume that's got a Sakya text, a Geluk text, and the Kagyu text side by side. Anyway, so I think they are the main things. It should read as fluently, and it should convey the mind of the writer. So in order for that to happen, and this is the most difficult thing with Tibetan translations and interpreters, is that any translator can only translate as well as they themselves understand. And as you know from your own Dharma path, the more we go on, the more the same words take on deeper and deeper meaning. We understand on a whole new level. It's like layers of the onion. And especially around topics like emptiness, shunyata, then it takes a lot of meditation experience to be able to be a good translator. Anyway, I think that maybe, I hope that helps Jamie a little bit. Yes, Annie. Oh, I think your microphone's off.
There we are. Now, I've told you several times before, which I like very much, is that you add comments to words, like this word has also meaning of and a taste of, things like that, which helps me very much, which, as I'm not English either. I don't know Tibetan. I know a little English, but I understand English. And I want to say also, I was to a lecture, a speech that Tenzin Palmo had, and she told me, she told us that she was translating some text, and she met some Tibetan Lama and asked him for a word that she didn't understand. And she asked him, "Can you tell me what this word means?" And he said, "Which text are you trying to translate?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I have never been taught that text, so I can't help you." So he couldn't say the word, even if he was, Tibetan. He knew the word, but not the meaning in that text.
In that context, yeah. No, and this when I was doing translations and studying Dharma, then really the most helpful thing each time is when the Lama unpacks a word, explains a word, gives you the feeling of it, just like you were describing at the beginning. But then also, just as you say, in the context of that text, whereas it might mean something else in other places. And like when I was doing the Buddha Nature translation, there's of course, when you're doing a translation, you go to see who's translated it before. And Maitreya's text was translated from the Japanese into English by a professor, linguistics professor, Buddhist in Japan, Professor Takasawi. And so I looked at his translation, and he had access to the Sanskrit as well. I think he understood the Sanskrit. So that gave rise to some really interesting things, because you could see there he had the language, Tibetan and Sanskrit, very competent in English. But he didn't have our lineage translation. So when I was sitting with Trangul Rinpoche, then you see that through the lineage explanation I was getting from him, that he got from his teacher, some sentences, they mean totally different. You look at the language, you think it means this, but once you get the inner meaning, it's just very different. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
It's interesting, when Taitsi Tupa has sometimes been asked to English meaning of a Tibetan word. So I've seen him do it a few times. Because there really isn't an English equivalent or exact equivalent, he would give 2 or 3 or 4 English words and say it means something like this. And between the 2, 3 or 4 versions he gives, you get a flavor of what it is. you don't really get a word that it means, but you do get the sense of it.
That's it. That's it. But when you're doing a written translation, you've got to opt for something, or keep the Sanskrit. It seems to be the one of the unexpected jobs I got. You know, there's this Kajumanlam where you have all these prayers that they do, and when making the prayer book, so in 2007, I think it was. I can't remember. Maybe it was later than that. But there was a committee translating it, Ringo Tuku and a couple of, about 4 or 5 translators. And I was just in India for something else, and then come up as one of his assistants knew I was there, and we got a message to come up and see Karmapa, and then he said, my team has finished this translation. Would you have a look at it and give some suggestions? I mean, the politics of that was, but I mean, it's Karmapa asking you, and then he told his assistant, and I said, but I've not got a computer here to work on. So he gave me his computer. So there I had Karmapa's computer. So when you open it up, you get the Windows screen and it says log on. So, you know, I get the password. I have his computer for 3 days to work on the whole Kajuman and go through it very quickly. So they're one of the things that came up with some of the terminology, which I thought was too much over the top. Was that when people can't agree, or when there's no obvious, straightforward, obviously this, when there's any kind of doubt or big ambiguity, then we go back to the Sanskrit. So, and there are some terms, they just, no way they can go into English. So there, but the agreement was to keep that to the barest minimum possible. And at first, the whole thing was just going to be my suggestions back to the Karmapa, and then you could just leave, and nobody knew anything. And it would have been his suggestions to the team. But then a day and a half later, he called together the team and called us up and said, well, Ken and Katja have got these suggestions. And he said, and he said, they're the elders. They have the most experience. You should listen to them. It was so embarrassing. But yeah, so they're Sanskrit when there is no English word. Sanskrit's universal. Every Buddhist country can refer back to the Sanskrit. And then eventually that becomes a new word, like bodhicitta has become a new word in the English language. Okay, well, maybe we finished for today. So thank you all very much. And remember your homework, explore your own sensorial history up to now and all of the framework of references that's given you, and your uniqueness, and also this way that when we cognize. Now, another example is if you're listening to music, get your ear to just listen to one instrument. See how you can focus in, recognize one instrument, even though there are 3 or 4 playing together, and all of the sound waves are mixed up to make the sound you're hearing, but nevertheless you can hear the clarinet, you can hear the bass, you can hear the voice. just something to explore. Okay, thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you,
Take
Ken.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ken.
Bye-bye, Ken. Thank you.
Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Okay, bye.
Bye.